Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. This is Mary Davidson, one of your co hosts, and today we are talking 2023 event trends with Will Curran. Will, if you don't know him, is really well known in the industry. He has done a lot for the event professional community. He has event podcasts, many of which you've probably listened to, and you've probably seen him around events and maybe on LinkedIn. And so this is going to be a really fun episode. We're so grateful to have him. So we're going to get into the episode, but also I want to give you a reminder. We are preparing for our 100th episode. Super exciting, but what we need from you listeners is to submit why you love events. That's the prompt. We have a survey link in the show notes that you can you can either tell us why you love events or you can submit an audio clip, which we will feature your voice on the podcast. So this is your chance. We'd love to invite you to participate. So be sure to check out the show notes for that. And without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm Logan Clements, one of your co-hosts, and I'm joined by fellow co-host Mary Davidson, and we want to save as much time for this week's episode as possible. We are talking about 2023 event trends with Will Curran, and I could not be more excited to get him on the podcast. So, Mary, I'm going to hand it over to you to officially introduce him.
Absolutely. I have Will's bio here. I'm going to add a little bit, but for those of you who are not familiar with Will, he is the founder of Endless Events and creator of the Event Profs community and host of the event industry podcast, Event Icons, Event Brew, and the Event Tech podcast, which these are iconic event podcasts, everyone. You're going to have to listen to them if you haven't already. Will has been named one of the most influential people in the meeting and events industry, one of the 40 under 40 event industry leaders, 35 entrepreneurs under the age of 35, and the highest customer satisfaction of any event company in the industry. Wow. Will has been producing in-person, virtual, and hybrid events since high school. Will, since high school, how old are you?
32 now. 33, something like that.
Well, you're under 35.
I got 2 more years for that 35 part of my bio, apparently.
Will, is there anything else you'd love to add to that amazing bio?
No, you read it so well too. Oh my gosh. But no, I appreciate that you guys telling him to check out the podcast too. We were talking off screen, but it feels like forever that I've been doing this, like recording and talking about the events industry stuff. So I love doing this though. So I'm really excited to dive in with you guys.
Amazing. And yeah, just a little context for our listeners for why we asked Will. I will say I found you through your podcast. I love listening to both the Event Tech podcast and the Event Brew podcast are part of my weekly ones that I try to keep up with and have appreciated all of your lovely insights, especially as I've dived more on the tech side of things that I would never have described myself as a tech person 5 years ago, but that's probably a lot of us in the event industry. Totally. You were on our short list when we were like, who do we need to have in 2023? So
thank you. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate that so much. Podcasting is such a one-way thing that sometimes, we always tell people emails. And, and a lot of times you don't really get a lot of emails because people sometimes are just really happy and listening. So I love getting to meet listeners face to face. And it's always so funny too. I've heard a couple times at conferences when we were talking about IMEX is that someone came up to me and was like, I recognize that voice. They had no idea what my name was or who I was, but they recognized my voice. And I think that was the first time someone had just been like, I know your voice. Well, who are you? No, you're a podcast guy.
That was awesome. That's the ultimate, sign of credibility to be recognized by your voice.
You guys are coming in there next. You guys are next.
Hopefully for all the best reasons.
I
hate their voice.
Hopefully all good things. That was one that we will take. But we'll just kind of jumping in, talking about these 2023 event trends, who even determines these event trends, Will? Or how we keep on top of them?
Well, of course, I come up with all of them, and I am the sole source of truth. It's funny. I've been writing this guide for the event trends for I think 10 years now or something like that. It feels like forever. And when I first started creating content, I really wasn't sure exactly how to make sure that like, hey, how am I an authority in the space? But lo and behold, a lot of people loved what I was writing, because a lot of times I look at these trends guides and realize they were just like a list of the same stuff over and over again, especially year to year. It was like taking the same thing and like copying and pasting and calling it a trend. I'm like, no, the trends are the things that are impacting the industry this year that you really need to be working on and you need to be, paying attention to. And especially for me, I was like in the weeds, like I was working events. A lot of times, like trends guides are written by people who are looking at the industry and seeing, maybe some broader trends, but like, you can talk about diversity, equity, inclusion for many, many years, but unless you're saying how are you going to actually make your events more diverse, that's what really matters. And so for a lot of times when I wrote this guide, it was about being practical and being very specific about this year. And honestly, like a lot of it comes down to the fact that like when you write these guides, it's about your opinion too. And I think like what's happened in terms of like the ranking on Google and so many, mentions on social media and stuff is that people agree with me, and which, I'm not gonna lie, when I first started in the industry, I thought I had many, many years to go before anyone would listen to any crazy idea that I had. But a lot of it, honestly, these trends that I end up coming up with is a mix of my experience in the industry, my experience in what I've seen at events that not only I planned and attended, but then also too, just like I consume so much content. So most people don't realize that like I read probably like I have a RSS read. I'm going through like maybe 300 blog posts a day. Not necessarily reading every single one, but I'm reading headlines. I'm skimming through articles. Like I'm talking about all the newest tech stuff. And that's one reason why I love the Event Tech podcast is that I literally like to be on the bleeding edge. If I don't know about something the second it comes out or the day it comes out, I'm like, oh, that's old news, And I think sometimes it might be a little annoying to my friends when they're like, oh, did you hear Chat GPT? It's so cool. And I'm like, dude, it's so like 2 months ago, man.
Okay, wait. So my mind is blowing. So let's just pause here for a second. What do you do to actually keep on top of this? You said that's an RSS feed. Is that what I
Yeah. Yeah, like I'm very systems focused, so like I like having the best tools to do the jobs that I need to do. So the ways that I consume content is through two main vehicles. One is through an app called Feedly, which is an RSS reader. If you ever use an RSS reader, it basically just makes it so all the blogs come to you and are in your list. And what's great about that is that you don't have to spend time like going to theverge.com and then trying to skim through their website. Instead, it's all listed from latest to oldest on there. One thing I really like about Feedly is that I set up certain topics and groupings that I like, and call it AI, but using machine learning, it kind of surfaces up the things I care about the most first. So I get that really, really quickly, like product launches, big announcements around technology. Also, I save a bunch of articles I like, and it actually learns like, hey, this article's like this article, so you might like it. So that's really, really helpful. And I think I have like something like, I don't know how many blogs I subscribe to on there, but I'm happy if anyone ever reaches out to me and says, give me your Feedly file. I'll literally just send you the file with all the blogs that I subscribe to. But something like, I think like 100, 200 different blogs on there. And I'm all the time picking and taking ones off that are good and not good. One thing I like about it too is that it deduplicates, which is really common in RSS readers. Like for example, today Microsoft's announcing that ChatGPT is included as part of Bing. I'm sure every single publication is going to be talking about this. What's nice is it combines it, so it says, "Hey, here's the article that did it the best," and you don't have to keep reading the same one over and over again. So that's one way that I consume content. The other way that I do a lot of content consuming and kind of trends analysis is through Reddit. I really like the Apollo app for Reddit because it lets me make it so once I've seen a post, it doesn't go back on the feed. So I'm constantly sorting by most popular for that day. And since I almost check it every single day, I almost am knowing the most popular stuff up at the top. So that's really, really helpful. And then I'm kind of like everybody else. I read, on the Kindle. I do Audible. I have my own do podcasting apps, that sort of thing. But that's pretty much the main ways that I consume, honestly, is through Feedly because I can read a headline faster than I can listen to a whole podcast, and through Reddit, just because it's, I think the upvoting algorithm is a really great way to surface the best stuff to the top.
I'm learning so much over that. We're gonna link some of these in the show notes. We'll probably reach out to you for
please do.
This is awesome. So thank you for answering that. So thinking through trends, what general trends, like the golden question for this episode, what general trends are you seeing or are slated to be a trend for 2023?
Yeah, it's funny. I made fun of the fact that there's trends that like continue year to year, but the two I start off with this year are ones that have been repeating for like the last 10 years. And the only reason that I keep them on there is because I think that they're really important, that people still need to act upon them. First one, sustainability, right? Like we are not in a place of at all a place where the world is completely sustainable, and we need to be thinking about how we're going to make our events more sustainable. There's tons of content. Like just Google events industry sustainability. We can dive deep into that one. But I have to still say it because it's a pressing issue. And we have to be thinking about these things because we're on a time clock as an Earth, right? The second major trend that I've been talking about for many, many years, and I'm not the expert, so that's one reason why I also just casually move past it pretty quick, but it's something that we need to improve upon, is diversity, equity, inclusion, especially after 2020, when we had the most, I think, diverse and inclusive events. When you talk about virtual events, literally anyone could show up. Most of the time they were free, and people really got a chance to interact with the events. I think our events were way more diverse and inclusive on there. People were even thinking like, how do I make this inclusive for the people that don't like technology? But then it seems like we're in this rush to go back to in person. It's all getting left behind. So I think there's a big focus that we have to be thinking about in terms of how do we continue to make our events as diverse and inclusive as they were in 2020. So those are the kind of the ones that like everyone's like, oh, I'm so tired of hearing about those, but they're important to pay attention to. So diving next into, I'll talk about one that hasn't been talked a lot about that is definitely a trend for this year. And it's that marketing has totally changed, or is going to change. I don't know if necessarily there's like a solution for what exactly it's going to look like, but before the pandemic, inbound marketing was like king. If you were doing content, if you were writing blog posts, you could use that to attract an audience and then get them to convert. And then you used to be able to pick up the phone and talk to those people and be like, hey, that blog post you read, I can help you even further. What's the kind of challenges that you're having? You know, and people were totally willing to talk to you. Now people download content and don't want sales calls. And that honestly, they don't convert anymore. Like inbound marketing as a whole is still important because I think people still want content, but it's not as much of like a conversion funnel as it used to be. So I think this is really, really important for events because events could be that next thing that could be used for marketing. It could be that, I'm going to talk about another trend a little bit later that could be the future of marketing. There's all these different avenues we can go with this, but no one has the solution in the way that like inbound marketing was pre-pandemic. But now because there's so much influx into tech, there's so much influx into people's time because everybody got good at live streaming and being on camera and everybody started podcasts during the pandemic. I think a lot of times there's so much content out there now that, it's not going to be the way that you gain a customer. However, I do think it's a great way to get your name out there. And I think it's also, people still want content out there too. So that's probably like the next big trend I think for this year is like figuring out what's the next major move for marketing out there for sure. So that's one of them. Do you want me to keep going?
I mean, these are great. You got my wheels turning about it. Okay. I do feel like you said everybody started a podcast, but I will say, because Mary and I are part of that group that started one, but we'd like to be proud that we're one of the few that have continued.
Yeah.
Because we have seen so many podcasts, just specifically the like event industry, because we've done research on other podcasters, and so many people started and very few are still active. So it was one that I was like,
I knew I was going to get crap from you guys for that.
We love it,
but no, you're right. It's also about the consistency. So I'm also that's why I'm saying like this year it's important to figure out what's next because it also might be that everybody who's making content right now, it's overwhelming now, but then, a year from now, no one's making content as much as they used to be. But I don't tend to have that mindset of, oh, hey, this is more of a temporary down slow. I like to think that like, hey, here's the next thing, because you can continue making content and stuff like that here on the right-hand side while you work over here on the left side about what the next future thing's going to be. So I think that's important. I also think that it means that the bar has also gone up. I mean, like you guys are doing a great job. We're on video where we sound really good. We made sure that everything's good to go. I think back in the day, prior to the pandemic, I think that you could get away with like being recording off of like iPod headphones or AirPods. And now like people were like, the people who are coming in the quality, the well-branded content, the great questions on podcasts, those are the ones that people are sticking around and listening to further than just one episode or whatever it may be because the bar is so high. Okay, so let's go on to other trends that are going on.
Before you keep going, I just want to highlight for our listeners, just I want to make sure everyone's really listening to these trends, because I think sometimes if I'm like an event planner, I'd be like, why does marketing matter to me? Or some of these are bigger decisions than I can make. But so much of the value I think we bring to clients is being aware of these. And like, you might not realize now how what you just said about the inbound marketing adjustment is going to impact an event you're having in November. But maybe a couple months from now, you'll be like, wait, I did hear that was different. And I want to challenge how we're integrating with marketing at our event or something like that. Like all of these, I know I constantly get asked by clients, like what we could do different or what are trends, and just having awareness of some of these, even if you're not totally sure how it applies to whatever event you're planning or client you're working with. I think these are super valuable. So I was like, my disclaimer, we probably should have done at the beginning, but we'll put a couple in.
For sure. I think, I would challenge definitely anybody who thinks like, how does this impact my events in here? That you need to be thinking deeper and more strategically about your events as well. And, there's tons and tons of podcasts that talk about why we need to be more strategic as an events industry. But I'll give an example of how marketing, for anyone that's still a non-believer out there, how marketing affects your events. But you have to think to yourself, okay, well, if marketing's changing, marketing is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars creating content right now. Well, if they're trying to say that's not effective anymore, where am I going to spend my money? They're looking for what that next thing's going to be. So I think you as an event professional have an opportunity to potentially create that next channel for them in a lot of ways, whether it's an event itself, but also think about it in this way. It used to be that, sponsors came in for events, and especially on the corporate side, I do a lot of corporate stuff, is that, the exhibitors say, I want a speaking engagement. I want to slot in to talk. Well, it used to be that you would do that and maybe they get a ton of leads that way. Well, now because people can have figured out how to digest content online, maybe seeing a sponsored piece of content at a conference might not be as effective as it used to be. So therefore, your sponsorship dollars aren't going as far as that they used to be. So now, as a sponsor, I'm looking, what's next for me? How am I going to actually drive business for my company? So the money that's getting shifted around inside of events is changing so much. So we really have to think about that, I think, in a lot of ways. Well, I hate to be the guy who says marketing's changing and inbound marketing's dying and not propose another solution out there. So this is the trend that I'm spending a lot of time talking about right now, because I think it's the one that if we concentrate as an industry our energy into right now, it can solve a lot of problems that we are having. Because a big trend affecting the industry in 2023 is that there's a lot of uncertainty, not as much as 2022, even 2021, definitely not 2021 and definitely not 2020, but there's still uncertainty. People aren't willing to just like dump money into events because attendance could be lower. It's technically maybe the second year you've gone back to being in person. What if the first year didn't go as well and now people don't come back for the second year? There's a lot of like what ifs that are kind of in place for this year. We have a lot of talk about economic uncertainty. Like, could a recession happen at any given second? Are we already in one? I heard someone say, oh, it's coming at the end of the year. And I'm like, are we ever going to decide when this recession is going to happen, right? And so like people are afraid. People don't want to hire. People don't want to spend tons of money on sponsorships, not knowing what's going to happen, right? I think a lot of that's uncertainty is kind of coming in. I think also what we noticed is that during the pandemic, it was really easy to reach people to come into the events because you literally sent out an email blast, someone could join in an instant and be there. In person, people were, in 2021, 2022, were just excited to get back. So sometimes people were just buying tickets just to know that their friends were going to be there and come back to it. Well, the problem is that it's going to get harder and harder for us to communicate and sell tickets in a marketing wise. Again, this comes back to why marketing is so hard, is that it's going to become harder and harder for us to convince people to come to our conference. So here's an example. We saw the death of a social media network in the last year. Twitter basically, I think, has kind of imploded. I don't think it's going to recover from this in any sort of way. I don't think anyone cares about Facebook anymore. Pretty much we're left with LinkedIn is like the main kind of driver, especially for B2B. But if you're doing a B2C conference, TikTok is probably the only, maybe Instagram you can use to advertise to. But again, like people are also starting to feel meh about social media. I don't know about you guys, but like, I don't get as much happiness from staying connected to my friends as much as I used to. Now I feel kind of stressed. I feel anxious. And there's tons of studies on this, right? That this is happening. So if people are going to be starting to pull away potentially from social media and, pretty much what we're left with is email marketing. Well, how are you going to get their emails in the first place? And sure, you can keep marketing to your past attendees, but more people are also looking at ways to like get their email down. So they're trying to filter all that crap away. Unless it's urgent and necessary right then and there, they're going to ignore it. So what that means is like, again, we're in this weird place with marketing. So where does the future of marketing go? And how can we get people to consistently buy tickets for our events? How do we create brand loyalty with our events? And I think the answer to that question is community. And I think that the way, and again, a lot of this stuff comes from the way that I've experienced the world, is that I love the idea of social networks, like the ability to stay in touch with both of you and post content, see when your new podcast episodes. I love seeing that stuff. But I don't want to log in there and feel meh when I see things. I don't want to see necessarily your guys' podcast side by side with my aunt complaining about politics, right? So, but I am looking for ways to stay connected to people, but I don't want to do it on social media. Well, this is where the perfect opportunity, where like kind of the opportunity crossroads meets, is that we build these gigantic audiences for events, right? Like we literally sometimes have thousands of people show up to our events. And let's say you do a 3-day event. You have so much energy built around the 3 days. There's probably a little bit of energy the day before. There's probably a couple of energy for a couple days afterwards. But then we just basically leave our attendees off on a cliff. But why don't we take that energy and find a way to harness it in the right way? Almost kind of like a laser. Instead of just doing a broad spotlight, like what if we laser focus that energy down? And the way I think that you can do this is by building a community for your events. And what I mean by that is not necessarily the broad term of build a community, because we already are building communities for these events. But instead, you need to figure out a way to say, here's a place that you can go right after the event to continue the conversations, to continue the connections, to stay in touch with each other, and all those things like that. And you see this not only in the business world, but like I'm going to a ton of music festivals. I'm in so many Discord communities for different music festivals I'm going to this year. I see this with consumer events. You see it everywhere, is that people are looking for a place to connect before, during, and after the events. We got the during part. Event technology has solved that for us, but how can we continue that energy? So that's one reason why you mentioned the event pros community at the beginning. One reason why I built that was to show people how you can build a community, how it's done the right way, because I think what we need to start doing as event professionals is building that space that exists after the event and before the event, and that continues year round, so we can keep in touch with our attendees, we can keep marketing them year round, we can keep the conversations going, and then also monetize that in the future to be able to create additional sources of revenue, longer partnerships and sponsorships. I mean, I do like a whole hour-long presentation on community, so I figure you guys probably have a ton of questions, though, after dropping all that.
I love that you're bringing up community. I was brainstorming some things that I like want to see and I hope to see, and I've heard a little bit, that has been brewing. And the idea of community is so important. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah,
I have
no problem.
so many questions, to be honest, but I think the main thing I want to call out to our listeners is like truly be aware of that community that Will just mentioned, and we'll make sure that we link it, the Event Profs community, because as he said, it's a great way to experience it, and then you can in turn figure out how to implement it in your own event. So I just wanted to, I guess, like recall that out. I think it's so important. Also, you mentioned Twitter is dying, and Logan, we just jumped on the Twitter bandwagon like way too late. We joined last year.
Are we really on the bandwagon though? We have a podcast Twitter account. Personally, I think I've had a Twitter account for now like 10 years, but I rarely use it. Like I've never been someone who got really into it. It was more, Will, how it sounds like you have your Feedly. Like I was like, I need to have awareness because things would go trending on Twitter, and it's fun to. I did digital marketing before, and that was like really helpful to see what people are talking about. But personally, I never like dove really into it as on my own. So it is fascinating though to think about like how we, I think events, so much of it is about how we gather, and then what's the so what after the event? Because I feel that just even personally when I plan things, it's so much build up, and my best practice, it's like, let's make sure our post event debrief is scheduled before the event even happens, because we're all just coming down from this big build up, as organizers. And I can't imagine attendees maybe haven't had as much of a long build up to it, but they're also coming down and recovering from their event. And, what do you want with them? So, you touched a little bit. I know you have your event tech podcast. So I would love to know just specifically if you had any tech trends that you wanted to call out for the coming year.
Everyone always asks me about tech trends. I'm like, stop thinking me as the tech guy. I'm just really good at it, but I'll do anything. No, I'm just kidding. When it comes to the technology side of things, like I'm actually kind of shying away from it this year. So to give you kind of a non-answer, I think we've spent so much time over the last 3 years focusing on technology, right? And granted, there are some trends. more companies are going to go out of business, more companies are going to get bought, all those things like that. But there's nothing that I'm sitting here being like, I'm not telling people pay attention to AR and VR. Apple's probably going to announce a mixed reality headset, but it's not going to affect the events industry in any sort of way. And I've been saying that for many years. It's going to take mass adoption of the hardware before it even becomes popular. But there's things like that going on. But really, I think this year is about not focusing on the technology for once. Yeah, because like last year was hybrid, right? Was the big trend. Like figure out a way to make it so you can bring a virtual audience into the in-person and make it diverse and inclusive, right? Everyone knows that. So I'm not going to say those same things, because if you have the opportunity to do hybrid, you're going to do it. If you aren't going to do it, you're not going to do it, kind of thing. But where reality is, like, I think where we need to be focusing our energy is less on trying to implement the next best app or the next best technology, and then go back to the basics. Like, I'm talking a lot about like content design right now. Like, do we really need 100 sessions at a conference? Do we really need 5 stages at a music festival? You know, do we really need to have every single element of the event planned? Or does we really like, here's the challenge I give a lot of people right now is like, why don't you just have one main keynote, one main act, whatever it is, and make that the sole focus, and then just give so much space around it for people to meet each other, talk about it, reflect on it, all those things like that. Like, we're not getting enough of that, I think, in the events industry right now, because we're like, how can I jam so much stuff and keep people occupied? Which a lot of that comes from the virtual event world, is that we had to keep people's eyeballs engaged and things constantly going on, because if you gave them an hour break, they're never coming back. Right. And I think that that's changed a lot when it comes to in-person and hybrid events, but people really need some kind of breathing room space. So I'm pushing people away from the technology stuff on here. In fact, like if you guys ask me about a non-tech trend, I have another one that's totally even further off basis from technology too, but it does relate, I guess. I don't think it really relates to technology, but we'll leave that teaser in there.
We want to hear it. What is it?
First, I want to end the event tech talk, so then we'll can get away from it. But more, because I think for me, my trend, like that I've been talking to clients, is more just the acknowledgement that there is no perfect platform. And I feel like that was something in 2020 and 2021 and even into 2020. It's like we're on the hunt. Like, no, it's going to be out there. It's like the holy grail. We will find it. And at this, like, I've had big budgets, small budgets, everything in between. And for all my small ones, I rationalize. I'm like, you could have $1 million and you still would not get the perfect platform custom built, because I've done a custom platform and there's still limitations to it. So it's been more just figuring out what best fits, and then, acknowledging those, shortcomings, which is similar to in-person venue. Again, I said, there are some perfect venues for people, but a lot of times there's going to be little things that, you're like, all right, we'll work around it, rough loading dock.
It's especially not going to happen now that like all the funding's dried up for event tech, right? Like we were in this, like everyone's dumping money. That's why you see like Hopin get billions of dollars in valuation. That's why you see these event tech companies go from like nothing to huge overnight, but like that's not going to happen this year. So it means also like, if you're not happy with the platform the way it is right now, they're probably not going to develop that feature that you absolutely direly need. And that was a learning for me actually at the end of last year, was that I was talking to a platform and wanted them to build out a lot of community features, and they weren't necessarily ready to do that. And they seemed excited at the beginning because they saw revenue dollars, they saw this opportunity, but then they realized all their money was in events. So why develop all these community features? And also, like, why did as this is dumb event tech, Will, is that I tried to pick a platform that based on what it might look like in the future, rather than being happy with the way it is right now.
Yeah. Oh, and that's the other thing too. I'm seeing a gap for folks who got sold on these future features.
Oh my God.
And then going into it, a platform I just worked with last month that they'd announced all these great features. I was like, great. I was in their learning platform. And then I messaged their tech support because I couldn't find it. And they're like, oh, that doesn't exist. And I was like, but you have like 8 different articles and a video of like, how to utilize this feature. And they're like, nope, that's not a feature. It's like, okay, so I guess we just, the funding dried up for it or something like. So, and I always come back to Zoom, and folks who like listen to this podcast know I'll sing its praises, not because it's the best fit, but because so many people adopted it. It's like the lowest barrier to entries for a lot of my clients that are looking for super simple ways to do virtual or even hybrid, and bringing in a virtual speaker in a way that some of the fancier tools would require way more onboarding. And, I think that'll help them stick around. And for some event pros who've been like resistant to learn it, I just will constantly say, just learn the ins and outs of it, because people are using it from now until, forever, sure. I feel like. So
Zoom is definitely here to stay, for sure.
Yeah. Well, you heard it first here, but here, well, we can get off of event tech. What was your other trend for 2023?
Oh, this is my favorite. This is my fun one. I think I have a couple other trends and stuff like that, but this is the fun one that usually sparks a conversation. I believe that 2023 is the year for cannabis at events. So like, I think that, for a long time, cannabis has been stigmatized. But now it's at the point where it's legal in so many different states that so many people, I think crave sounds a little bit more intense than it really is, but people want to have that experience at events. And especially if you're in a state where it's legal, and you're not creating a space or an experience around it, attendees are going to figure out how to do it on their own anyways, right? They're going to go into take the edible, they're going to eat all your munchies, and you're not going to be prepared for how hungry everyone's going to be, right? Like all these things like that, I think are going to exist this year. And I think that it's going to continue to get legalized more and more and more across the entire country. For all of our listeners that are international, I apologize. I'm mainly talking about the United States right now, but I think it's a really, really big trend. And I think that for a lot of times as event professionals, we think to ourselves, well, what did I have to do that? Well, sometimes it's about creating the set and setting. It's about, creating the right experience, but also preparing that less and less attendees are drinking alcohol than ever before. So one thing you want to consider is how this trend impacts is maybe we need more mocktails. Maybe we need to not have necessarily an open bar. Maybe there's a small handful of people who are going to be drinking at your event. There's so many implications as it comes part of this, but especially the younger generation. And I think I get to speak a little bit for for millennials now at this point, but my generation is less let's go have 20 beers at the open bar. And they're more yeah, let's smoke a J and go hang out and talk about our feelings, So I think this is totally shifting the way that we do events. And I think this year, the reason why it's a trend for this year is that you're probably going to have an event in that space at some point, but also you're going to have attendees who are maybe going to show up to a happy hour or something like that high rather than drunk. And what does that mean? And if you aren't prepared in thinking about it and, not necessarily even designing around it, but just being aware of it, then you're going to get left behind because at this point, it's again, not stigmatized the way it used to be. It's totally more acceptable. And I think that's the thing that we need to be thinking about when it comes to the events and what's actually impacting is this experience.
We're millennials too, so we can be a good enough sample size for this purpose and represent everyone. But, our faces were shocked when you said that. I was not expecting you to say that. Now I have to know what other random fun ones do you have?
Because fun trends and stuff. That's my most fun one. That's my least controversial one. But I guess the other controversial one, that I think about, so if you want to hear quick tips and things like that, I don't think this is a trend, but this is one way I'm thinking about events now moving forward is that, so many people right now coming in with this economic downturn are thinking, how can I maximize the budget that I existently have? How can I be prepared for my budget to go lower? If your budget's going up, congratulations, kudos, but I still think you need to think about this way. But for example, one of the ways I think about it is that so many people are thinking, how do I stretch my budget? How do I shift it? How do I do all these things like that? And no one's really thinking about taking their budget, crumpling into a ball and throwing it in the trash can. I use the term instead of just thinking outside the box, crush the box and start completely new. So one of the concepts that I have around that I think can challenge, and again, a lot of my thoughts aren't necessarily do this one thing. It should be hopefully a thought experiment to get you thinking in the way that you need to be. But here's one of my most controversial ones. I think that we need to get rid of catering budgets at events. Maybe not for the staff and things like that. The people who literally can't leave the venue and just have to be there to eat. That you can keep that budget. But I'm talking about, why do we spend $250,000 on food for lunch that no one wants to eat, that the only reason they're eating is because it's free included as part of the ticket price, when in reality, what I think we need to start doing for events is offering more time for lunch. So instead of an hour, give them 3 hours and then give them a list of all the restaurants nearby and go send them out to go walk to the nearest restaurant and obviously call all the restaurants and be we're about to send, 10,000 attendees to these 10 different restaurants or whatever it is. But instead, put the onus on the the attendee to pay for their own food. So it saves you costs. Everyone's okay with it. The food's way better, but also most importantly, I get more time to have the conversation during lunch. I can't tell you how many times that like I end up leaving an event site to go eat the nearby food that I want to try to enjoy and enjoy the city. Again, also local impact happens as well. But how many times I've done that, but then had to freaking book it right back to the event as soon as possible because lunch was only an hour and I basically lost 40 minutes of it to walking or whatever it is. So I can tell you that like I think that people value the idea of having food on site paid for way too much when in reality like it's gonna get wasted. So there's a sustainability factor. It's gonna cost you more money than if you just send people to the local restaurants. And 3, like, why don't we also, as an idea, like give vouchers or coupons to attendees and say like, hey, call up the restaurant and say, hey, I'm going to send attendees your way. Can I give them a $5 off coupon? And you could totally do that and put that in as part of your event app. So they show the coupon right before they pay or whatever it may be. And I think like that's the kind of experience I think people need to start thinking about when it comes to events rather than taking the same thing they've been doing since 2019 and just rehashing it over and over and over again, thinking like, how can I actually do this differently?
That is, yeah, that's a good one. And that is like an aspirational trend, I feel like, for myself that one of our most popular episodes on this podcast is like episode 2, where we talked about why you need a North Star for your event and how important it is to figure out what your purpose is and why you're here and not just being like, well, because we did it that way last year. And a lot of times sometimes we get brought in that process where you're too far down the road and then you're confused of why you're over budget by a bunch or some of your comments about programming and things like that I'm always like, why'd you do 3 consecutive keynotes? Because it's 3 times the crew. Like, just do one. And they're like, well, we can't. We're too far down. And it's like, okay. There's only so much you can cut to still have 3 things happening at once versus one thing happening at once, and doing more of these small breakouts. Because I know I'm similar to you, Will, where it's like, what have I personally found value from when I go to events, I joke, it's always for research and for enjoyment, but like, I'm also figuring out what parts I love. And that was something that was hard virtual with those like serendipitous moments of meeting people. And it's usually over food or those gaps in programming that then you can like connect on something that you both heard, but it's not so much a connection I'm making next to someone I'm sitting at, in a keynote session or something like that. It's usually outside, afterward or something like that, and creating that space. And I think sometimes event organizers think that space is bad. And that's usually like where the best parts come from.
I just sit in the hallways at conferences now and just wait for people to come to me. Like, it's so much better that way. And like, it's a more enjoyable experience for me. Like especially when I was like knee deep in like running my company really, really hard, is like, I had lots of meetings that were like literally happening while I was at a conference. I just do them, from a table on the outside. But what was nice is like, I weaved in my work, but like, I got so much more value because I had to have deeper conversations. It wasn't rushed. Like, as long as I'm still attending conferences and feel like I still haven't seen everybody, that means that there still wasn't enough time for me to see everybody. And I think that's like something we need to be paying attention to.
So interesting. I love what you're saying. Also, you do get the liberty of just sitting outside and having people come to you because now everyone recognizes your voice, right? They'll just hear you and say, oh, that's Will. That's awesome. Well, we have one last question for you. This is another important question. Looking forward to the future, even like future past trends. The state of the industry obviously has changed a lot over the last few years. So how do you see the industry changing and developing in the years to come?
There's one guaranteed trend I know will continue to happen, is that event professionals will have more and more on their plate than they've ever had before, right? Like, I talk about community and usually the question comes like, so do I have to do this now, right? And so that's one trend I think that's always going to be there, that people need to be paying attention to, because you also then have to design your role around it, or you design your team around it. If community is something that's going to help propel your marketing and your alignment to your attendees, to your brand, or whatever the heck it may be, like, maybe you need to be thinking not about how you're going to do it, but how are you guys going to build a team to be able to do it? And I think that far too often, every single year, there's some new trend, there's something new that pops up on the plates that then everyone goes, oh, and I don't have the time to do it. And then what it leads to is more stress, frustration, or just the not doing of the trend. And I think you saw this exact same thing happen when virtual came around, is that there were so many people who were like, oh, I have to learn virtual event platforms. I think it was really good that everyone did do it because it got everyone more comfortable with technology. But there's so many people who then decided to retire, people who went out of business, who said, I don't want to learn this next thing. I don't want to get involved in this next trend. And Yeah, that's not a once in a lifetime pandemic. We're probably gonna have another one, but a pandemic is obviously a case where something crazy happens. But like this is gonna happen with virtual reality in a couple years. You're gonna have to know how it works and experience it in some sort of way. So maybe it's time to bring, if you don't want to do it, bringing on a VR person. But what I think for most people is that you got to keep learning and growing. Like that's the one thing for me is like, I don't ever want to feel stagnant. I don't ever want to feel like I'm not learning and trying something new. Like, so for example, me personally, the big trend I think that like I'm focusing on and trying to learn right now is like the AI tools, like the chat GPTs of the world, the AI assisted writing, the automations with video, like just getting in there and playing around with the tools makes it so I don't feel like I could never do this. I'm prepared that if it becomes a seismic shift in the events industry, I'm at least cognizant that I know how to find the right tools, but also how to find the right people involved. So I think that's one thing to just really keep in mind. This stuff is always going to be changing. So just keep learning and growing and keep building a team around you because, yeah, events are just going to become more and more complex over the course of the foreseeable future.
I can't think of a single role at an event where you wouldn't have to keep learning. And that is encouraging to me, but maybe scary for some. But that is like the beauty of the industry. Well, we would love to talk to you for hours and hours and hours. I feel like this is just scratching the surface. But is there anything else you want to add for our listeners before we wrap up?
Yeah, when it comes to anything that anyone wants to talk about ever, I'm always open to talk more about it. We'll have to do a part two, I think, of this. Is this a good chance for me to plug some of the additional resources for people to check out? Or I wasn't sure if that question was coming next. So when it comes to like staying in, if you like this stuff, first check out our event trends blog. We write it every single year. Just go to helloendless.com, search the word trends. I'm pretty sure if you search the word event trends, it's going to rank #1 on Google. So check that out. That's a great place to start. Check out all of our podcasts. If you like podcasts as well, I appreciate you guys' shout out in the beginning as well. And then if anyone ever needs event services, reach out to Endless Events. We're here to help out in any sort of way. And then the next kind of like part of what I'm promoting a lot of right now is the event props community. So we started it as a Slack group in the pandemic, then evolved it into its own dedicated app June of last year. So now we're coming upon like its year anniversary, and we just transitioned to becoming a paid community. I think good things that have a lot of value, you should pay money for, right? And that's how you make things super sustainable, not in just like the sustainability factor, but also like so it lasts for generations to come. So if you like these kind of conversations, come join us at Event Profs Community. It's designed to be the first online first community for the events industry. So you come in, you get all the value, you get to learn, you get to grow, all those things like that. And if you feel icky on social media and want to get off, come join us. It's eventprofscommunity.com. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's blowing up right now. So that's where I'm spending most of my energy these days.
That is awesome. And I know Logan and I are definitely going to check that out. As we said before, we'll link some of those in the show notes, listeners, so you can have easier access to those. But how exciting, how amazing. And thank you for these trends, Will. I like my mind is blowing and I'm going to have to go like debrief this episode in my head and figure out how I'm going to implement these trends. So I know I really appreciated it. Thank you so much for your time and for your energy. And thanks for being on the podcast.
You're so welcome. Thank you guys for having me. It's been so much fun. I love getting to talk to you. And yeah, if you guys ever need anything, you just let me know. I'm here.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm sure we'll be in touch soon. I'm sure we'll do a part 2 of this episode. So stay tuned, everyone. And thank you again, Will. Now we're going to turn it over to Logan, who has our bonus tip for today.
Yes. So this one is for the quote unquote road warriors. It's a term I recently had a friend in the industry talk to me, and it's about people who are constantly on the road and traveling. Is make yourself a self-care kit. And this is for like your physical health, your mental health. And the goal of the kit's just to make you feel more at home when you're busy and traveling and probably going from hotel room to hotel room. And it can be unique to you. This is like an exercise that I've started doing for myself. So it has everything from like heating pads for my back because I get sore from standing and walking around a lot. I love Rice Krispie treats to something sweet if I get snacky. Massage ball for my feet, Epsom salt bath bombs. I also love twinkle lights. So I'm going to bring a set of those to a hotel room near me so I can make it feel more at home. But even if you aren't traveling, I do encourage you to make it yourself a box or something of things that make you feel good so that you can make sure that you recharge and are ready to face the day. Because I feel like as event profs, like our mental health is really important, but also our physical health.
Logan, this is a great bonus tip. I was just thinking about this and talking to someone else about it. So noted on all of these. So thank you for your bonus tip. And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the Better Events podcast. You can find us on Instagram, on Twitter, but I mean, Twitter, we've talked about that today, on LinkedIn, on any pretty much social platform at Better Events Pod. Send us an email at bettereventspod@gmail.com. And thank you so much again for listening. And we will be back with you next Wednesday.